All right, we're recording.
Okay.
So, Professor, we'll start with when did you first encounter the teachings of the Buddha?
The teachings of the Buddha. Let me think about that. Well, it was somewhere around 1977 when I started looking into these matters. And I had a weekend where I was other people thought I was going crazy and I thought I was going sane. That's a long story we won't have time for now. But then after that happened and I got back to my ordinary life, I started looking and I said, surely I'm not the first one this has happened to. So I looked into a whole bunch of books. One was the Religions of Man, now called the World's Religions for political correctness reasons, by, let's see, what's his name? That escapes me at the moment. Anyway, he went through this, Houston Smith. He went through all the religions a chapter at a time. And given my experience, I had a couple of criteria that I wanted. One was that it had to be the possibility of humor in this religion, because I knew that was part of what's wonderful about life. So it had to be humor in it, and also it had to have the possibility of anyone attaining it without a special blessing of some kind. All right, so what he did was go through all the religions, all the major religions of the world very sympathetically. I mean, if you read each chapter of Christianity, Judaism, you'd say that's a good religion. It wasn't that he was praising some and not praising others. But finally, the one that met all these tests, in other words, the Sufis had some humor in them. So they passed the humor test. The Christians and the Jews, they didn't have much humor. As far as I know, there was no jokes in either the Old or the New Testament. Pretty serious stuff. Whereas the Sufis had a humorous aspect, and in Buddhism there was a lot of humor, not giant jokes at the expense of somebody, but just appreciating the human experience. And the title of that chapter, or maybe the subtitle, was "The Man Who Woke Up," and I thought that's the idea. I mean, you could wake up, and when I read the story of the Buddha, whether it's apocryphal or not didn't make any difference. The idea that he had lived in great luxury as a prince. The story was his father, when he was born, had consulted soothsayers who said he would either be a great prince or a great king. The father said, well, great king suits me. So he tried to isolate him from all the problems of life. And the story is that when he went out through the town, the father would arrange that soldiers and guardians would go with him, make sure he didn't see anything that might trouble him. But one day they screwed up, and he found a person who got old. It was amazing. I never knew people could get old. Wow, look at them, they get old. Another day, same thing happened, only this time he found a sick person. Oh, that wasn't too good either. Big surprise to know about old age, sickness. And then a dead person, another day. Oh man, dead, that's terrible. And the story is the fourth day that they screwed up, he met a priest, a holy man. And when he asked, what's that guy? He said, well, that's someone who helps people with these other things that you've seen. And then he said, well, that's what I want to do. And he resolved to do that, even though he was married and had a child at the time. So he wanted to become someone who could help people with the suffering. Now, but before we get to that, just think about that story that each of us in our lives at some point learned about getting old, getting sick, and dying. I mean, two-month-old kid doesn't know that, 3, but a couple of years old, they may get the message. They've been sick, perhaps. But we don't even remember when we first got this big wake-up call to the nature of existence. We suppressed it probably more than any other memory that I've heard about. Anyway, when he decided to go off, he said, well, I'm going to live, I've been in lecture, going to live a life of ascetics. I'm an ascetic, and for 7 years or something like that, he lived on practically nothing. Said that he said he could see his backbone through his stomach. He was so thin, living on a few grains of rice a day, seeking enlightenment. But he didn't get it. So he tried, luxury didn't give it to him, asceticism didn't give it to him, so finally gave up, sat down, and became enlightened. And the story is that the last temptation that he faced was, now that you've seen the possibilities, why do you want to go back to all these other people who will be ignorant and haven't gotten there yet? They want to understand. And he said, well, there will be some who will understand. And that is the maxim of anyone who wants to be a teacher. And just think about that. And whenever you teach a class, you can't presume that everybody's getting what you think you're saying. But in any class, I mean, from the lowest grade onward, there will be some who get the message. Maybe all, who knows, but at least some. You can't count on all, but you can count on some. Great maxim for a teacher. So that's how I got interested in Buddhism, and then I followed it further. My second wife, my late wife, who also got into Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the Shogun Trungpa, who was someone who came out of Tibet to escape the invasions and for China and so forth, and went to India, and then he went to England and got a great education. And he wrote several books on the nature of Buddhism, which are fascinating, still well worth reading. So that was probably my modern day introduction to some of these ideas, and the Eightfold Path, all of the teachings of Buddhism, the suffering coming from attachment. These notions are very clear. As Dylan said, freedom's another word for nothing left to lose. And yeah, when you've given up your attachments, then you're free. So that's Buddhism.
So when was the first time that you experimented with some of these ideas on yourself?
Well, after this weekend in 1970, I started doing this. That's when before that I taught my technical courses, everything was going fine, but I never concerned myself about the nature of society or ethics particularly, except in a general way. And at that time, I realized that because what I was teaching could be misused as well as used, I had to get into the ethical dimension. And I also, just about exactly that time, saw the necessity for people to be free. And so we started another course on what it would take to be free in society. Now it's interesting, Buddhism has a couple of sayings that are very significant. One is, if you see a Buddha in the road, kill him, which really means you've made a mistake, because everybody has Buddha possibilities. The other one about Buddhism, let's see, everybody can be a Buddha, and I'm trying to find the right way to put this. Yeah, the other one is, you can't put Buddha in jail. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't put his body in jail, but his mind is always free. And by his mind, I don't mean his thoughts, I mean his feeling of being there and being concerned about teaching. And we saw that in the concentration camps, where some people, in spite of the horrible things that were going on, managed to live a compassionate life. So even in those circumstances, they were helping others and so forth. Yet they knew that they were headed for their own deaths. So that idea that Buddhism, the Buddha nature can exist in everyone, and that it can't be imprisoned. So it's not about that people can't put you in jail, but it's about your freedom. Or as someone else said, your ultimate freedom is your ability to choose how to respond to any situation. So if the Gestapo's coming to arrest you, well, you could spit in their faces and so forth. You could go humbly, you could cry and beg. But those are all choices that you've got. They can't make you behave in a certain way. They can just do things to your body. But then I realized that it's freedom, I think, the idea of being responsible for your actions and able to choose them is exactly the best way to learn things. An analogy would be, if you learn to ride a bicycle with training wheels, then you may never want to take the training wheels off because they're always going to be support. You never have to learn the nature of balance the way you should. So anything that constrains you in your behavior is going to lower your level of learning, the speed at which you learn and what you learn. And if you live in a very compulsive society, one that makes you do things, well, you don't see what it would be like if you tried different things and learned from them, as opposed to just following the rules of that society. So that started these other two courses in ethics and the notion of a free society where peaceful, honest people have the right to be left alone.
So you've often shared the story of your experience in the Zen workshop. Could you share that?
Okay. Let me make sure I know which one you're talking about.
This is the one where you stare at the same object 3 times with 3 different beliefs.
Oh yes. That they didn't think they were Zen, but this was another organization. I had a weekend workshop, and the idea of that one, and it's certainly consistent with Buddhism, is that a lot of your life is governed by your beliefs. And so the notion of this training was to make you realize that you could manage your beliefs, that your beliefs are your creations. And the importance of this was if you ask somebody what they would like to do, they might say, well, I'd like to be a great novelist. I write the great American novel. And then the next statement might be, but I couldn't because I got a D in English and I couldn't spell and so forth. In other words, when you look at the creativity of people, it's a belief that they have about something they can do. It's often accompanied by another belief that kind of makes the first one not possible for them. Now, we normally think about it. You could be a great writer and you needn't spell. You could have editors patch up your grammar and all that, and you could still be a great writer. So that belief is not serving you. And what this training does is show you how to manage your beliefs, which means how to create the beliefs that will serve you and to discreate the beliefs that are not serving you. And that's an amazing level of education. It's extremely powerful. And so when I went through this, and I spent, I guess, several weeks in different courses and whatnot, when I realized this, the next question is, what beliefs am I going to create? Because I can have anything that I want. Now, what am I going to do? Well, let's get back to this notion of how your beliefs affect you. The experience you were mentioning was one of the exercises in this training. And the exercise was go and find some object. And they didn't say what, anything you like. And then experience it with the belief that it's beautiful. So you're going to go out there and imagine it's beautiful. Well, I found this was in a well-landscaped home, and I went outside and I found a stone lion. And I looked at it, that's it, look at the curve of the back. I found all these things with the viewpoint of its belief that it's beautiful, things to find beautiful in that stone lion. And after you've done that, then you come back in, they say, okay, now go out and experience the same thing with the belief that it's ugly. And you go out, and now you notice all the little pit marks and discoloration, all kinds of things you didn't really notice before. This is a really ugly stone lion. And then you come back, and the third time you go take a look at it, this time with the belief that you're going to see it as it is. In other words, as that really is, without the judgment of it's beautiful or it's ugly. And this is kind of transforming because you realize that you go through your whole life filtered by your beliefs. That anything you see, you're going to interpret according to what beliefs you have. And psychologists have demonstrated this. If you introduce a person they haven't met to a new person as this is a really brilliant friend of mine, and so then you get the experience. They'll see the brilliance in what. If you say, "Don't trust this guy," he's a sneak, they'll probably see that. I mean, there are many stories in the folklore about how people's beliefs affect what their experiences are. And so the ideal would be to see things as they are, unfiltered by some belief system. And that's something we can learn to do. Now, when I then faced, having had this training, the question, what beliefs I was going to create, I said, well, some people, because they don't tell you that in this training, they don't tell you what beliefs you should have. It's not like here are the good things to create. So it's a challenge. If you can create a belief, what would you create? Now, the fundamental notion of this training is that you experience what you believe rather than that you believe what you experience. And that's what the training's all about, because we all think, well, our beliefs are formed by what we've seen, but you can see, because of these filters, that that's not so. But once you get rid of that, you say, okay, what beliefs am I going to have? And some people might think, well, I'm going to have a lot of money or something like that. Well, I realized that any beliefs that I created, and I have a list of them actually carried around in my cell phone, among other places, that they had to be beliefs that I would want everyone else to have. It's like, Kant's idea of morally legislating any ethic, that you should choose your ethics to be those that you could have everybody follow if only you could, like not stealing or harming or lying and so on. But this is the same thing, only at the level of belief. The belief is something that I wish everybody had, not just me. Okay? So, I'll give you one example. We could spend quite a bit of time on this. One belief I created was, I have plenty of time. And that was a surprise to me, because I was big on to-do lists and, get this thing done and whatnot. But I noticed that there was a big change once I created this belief, because before I'd have my to-do list and it would be ordered, this is number 1, this is number 2, and I better get that number 1 done and whatnot. So I might be hurrying to my office to get the first one done and, say hi to some people and whatnot. And then as soon as I created this belief, I would still be going to the office, but now I would see somebody say, hey, remember that meeting? Can we do it at 2? Great. In other words, there were things on the list that I could get rid of without any effort, just from the belief that I had plenty of time. In other words, I didn't have to focus and have telescopic vision. I could have broad vision and see how my life was offering to me many opportunities to get what I wanted to get done. Another one, just to mention that, was I have plenty of help. And you're an example of that. So that it's not some contract we made, you and I want you to help me in all these different ways, and here's what I'll do for you. You were just yourself, I was just myself, and you have been a wonderful help to me in so many ways. So from the smallest things to the biggest. And in the past, I would have been, before I formed this belief, I said, well, I can do it myself, stay back, I don't need it, I'm independent and all that. And I realized after I formed this belief that people really do want to help you. You're not imposing on them by getting their help. You're in some ways making both of you better off. So these are just a couple of the beliefs that I formed, the time and the help, maybe there's 10 or so, that can't hurt anybody else and certainly serve me. And I think would serve them if they had those beliefs too.
What are some of the other ones?
Well, I love.
Sorry?
I love. Not some people or some time. I just love. I mean, why not? Right? and I'm lovable. See, that sounds simple, but there are people who go through life thinking that they're not lovable, they're not worthy of love, and they'll push people away and give reasons why those people shouldn't have anything to do with them. So these sound very simple, but they're very powerful. Very powerful. Oh, another one was, I have everything I need. Isn't that great? I have everything I need. And it's always been true. And sometimes it has been demonstrated over and over again. Sometimes before I can form a need, somebody's there with it. I mean, they don't even know that I have this need, and they turn up. So there's no striving for, man, I better get the things I need. I have what I need. I have more than I need, actually. Which means I am generous, and so forth. But once you get this set down, and this is only mine, this is not coming out of some training, a suggested list. I just wanted to have things that would work for me and everybody in my life. Yeah, it's something within everyone's power.
Do you have another one? Just every outcome is the right outcome?
Well, I should really look at it, right? I mean, it's something I put a lot of time, but it's the particular situation that shows the belief that was, let's say, behind this situation. Right? So I have great people in my life. I mean, there's so many, but some of them are like corollaries. Once you love, you're going to have great people in your life. So sort of one follows from the other. Might as well throw it in there. It doesn't hurt, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, right? Who wouldn't want to have great people in their life? That's all. Yeah, it's very, very freeing, and that, this evolution has been over. Let's see, started about 30 years ago with that weekend experience of getting into Buddhism, and then in some of these other trainings like 15 years, and now my life just works that way. One of the things I realized was there's nothing I have to do. Nothing I have to. After all, if you have everything you need and you're loved and all this, what do you? So when you don't have to do anything, then you can choose to do anything, and that possibility is out there for you. So what do I choose to do? And for me, it's really going back to teaching. But teaching can't be separated from learning. So I can't. We really need a new word, which is the complex of teaching and learning. So the things that I'm about in my life are learning and teaching. And if I stop doing the first, then I'm going to stop doing the second. But I see it's a continual growth spiral. The more I learn, the more I can teach, the more I'll learn. Because sometimes the people you teach are the ones from whom you learn the most. This operates at every level. If I find a good joke and I tell someone, then even if I forget it, they'll remind me of it. And this happens sometimes. People in a class in the past will be some exercise that I used to do, but I'd forgotten I ever did it. People say, remember that? That was really great. Oh yeah, I should do that again. Right? It's wonderful. Yeah, life is good.
So do you also meditate?
No, I'm a diamond path person. I've done it and I appreciate it. I think it's a great thing to do. I was onto something else there, but it'll come back.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. Everything is perfect. See, this was it. Everything that happens to you in my life has been essential to my life. Even the stuff that I thought at the time was just terrible. I mean, I've had 2 wives die, that I loved greatly, and still do in a sense. But and at the time, that seemed terrible. But it was just part of life's experience. And I remember somebody saying about one, said, "Don't you miss her?" And I said, well, to me, it's not that she's disappeared. it's just if somebody said, how would you like this new Ferrari to drive for a month? Free. And I thought, oh boy, yeah, and I'd enjoy that, and I'd drive it around and really experience Ferrari-ness, whatever that is. And then they took it back again. See, what I say, now I'm really unhappy because I had a Ferrari, now I don't. Or what I say, it was really great to have that Ferrari for a month. That was a great experience. And that's the way I look at the people in my life, even if they've died. Part of life's experience. And just at the simplest level, whenever you take a trip and your baggage is lost or something like that, and at the time you're really you're not happy with it, maybe because you don't have this realization that everything is perfect, but you're bitching and moaning about you couldn't change your clothes for 3 days and some of that. Well, when you get home, that's going to be one of the best stories you tell about your trip. I mean, who wants to hear the story about we checked in the hotel, we had a great room, we had a great dinner? Great, who cares? But it's the changes in life that are unexpected are more likely to teach you. So for me, this means not getting upset. Now, I'm not saying I don't, but that's my goal, and I'm getting pretty good at it. Not to be upset by whatever happens, but just to choose given what so. Yeah.
So, what are 3 stories of the Buddha that have most inspired you?
3 stories of the Buddha. That's a good story. Well, I'm certainly no Buddhist scholar, but one that really inspired me was that after preaching for 40 years, preaching isn't exactly the word, he went through life with a begging bowl. I mean, he didn't have any attachments at all. And, of course, he did just fine and awakened a lot of people, I'm sure. But finally, he had a meeting with some of his disciples, as I understand it, and in the home of a simple person, a carpenter or something like that, who prepared the meals, and it turned out that what the Buddha ate was a poison mushroom or something that was going to kill him. And the first thing he did was to go to speak to the carpenter and tell him, thank you for releasing me from this life. You can imagine, that he wouldn't have done it himself. But he was ready to go on, and this was just a simple way of passing for him, which I thought was pretty good. Another story I liked about the Buddha was the one about when he was asked a question about life after death. And he said, which way does the fire go when it goes out, north, south, east, or west? Which just shows that the level of understanding that you have to deal with. You better focus on living this life and not which way the fire goes when it goes out. Tend the fire now, in a sense, and don't worry about what happens to it in this other realm, if it exists. Which is interesting because many of the cultures in which he preached had a belief in successive lives, karma, and so forth. But my understanding is the Buddha did not preach that in 622 or whatever, 600 BC, or wherever he was here. Yeah, a lot of stories that are maybe apocryphal. Because see, the Buddha was just Siddhartha Gautama. He was not the first and not the last. And I remember in Tibetan Buddhism, there was another one of his disciples many hundred years ago who preached non-attachment. And at one point, his son died. And his disciples said, well, are you not attached? I mean, you look sad. And he said, sometimes it's very hard, which is about the nature of human existence. So those are stories that made a big difference to me. Another one was when he was dealing with some of his disciples about who should take Buddhism to China. They all would like to go, and the story is that one of them picked up a flower and looked at it and he was the one who was chosen to go to China. I mean, it's not like he had a test or he just knew that this was the person who could bear the message clearly to another group.
What would the Buddha say to, I mean, if he were to see people struggling and trying to get out of their misery, do you believe that he would say you should meditate, or you should take one particular path, or would he approach each person differently?
Well, I think that the first thing he would, his teaching was based on this idea that the misery comes from attachment. And I've applied that many times in my own life, that I once had a student who was very upset about having to take a particular course in order to get her degree. And was saying things, the faculty is not fair, they should, and she was very unhappy down to the point of crying. And I remember the teachings of the Buddha, and I said that there's something that can free you from this right away. And she said, what? And I said, well, give up your attachment to getting the degree. And then she realized that this pain was coming from the attachment, and it wasn't somebody, I mean, this requirement, anyone look at it would say is quite reasonable for getting this degree. But she was so attached to it being an unfair requirement that she didn't realize the real source of her pain. And then she straightened up and understood and took the course and got what she wanted. Yeah, so, but this is very difficult for people to do. This attachment, it's also true at the meditative level. You can see that one point of meditation is to realize that you're not your thoughts. As we think in the West, the story, the mind is a drunken monkey. We have all these things in our head. I'm late, what am I getting for dinner today? We think that's us, but it's just kind of the noise in the background of us. And when you look at things that people do that they later regret, like road rage, okay, they get carried away, they have this anger and desire to strike back at someone who's cut them off in the car or something like that. But when you really look at it, if you go through this three-step process, the first thing you'd say is, I'm angry, because you are. And then you say, well, wait a second, I'm having the thought angry, which is also true, but now there's a little separation. And then you step back further and you say, the thought angry is having me. And then now you've got choices. Do I like this thought? You can change your thoughts in an instant, right? So change that thought and all of a sudden the problem goes away. But I've noticed in everyday life, I have a friend who told me just recently, she said, this person said something to me and I was really upset by it, so I told her I didn't, and so forth. I said, well, you're upset. Oh yeah, well, upset is like angry. I'm upset. And I just take it back, right? The thought upset is having me, I'm having the thought upset. Now what are you going to do about this, right? And all of a sudden you're free. I tell, sometimes in class I tell the students, because I don't give out grade, I say, look, you can embarrass me, you can insult me, anything you like. That's fine, because no one can embarrass you or insult you unless you agree to it. They can say things that are vile. You say, that's interesting. Or like someone says, you're a vile, ignorant person, and you say, oh boy, that was like a cannonball. It went right by me. What did I do or say that made you say that? See, now all of a sudden, you're not, I'm not, and you can't say that to me, Yeah, forget it. They try to insult the Buddha, right? You're too fat, maybe a joke, right? And yet people go through life taking umbrage at others for different actions. Just shortens the fun you can, shortens the time you can be having fun by having those thoughts.
Is there a particular story of the Buddha that you think most people have not heard of or are not as familiar, but which you think is pretty important?
Well, you see, it's more the teachings than the stories, although he certainly did things that were evidence of his great teachings. Let me see, what would be a good one? You know, if you see someone who is practicing Buddhism very clearly, and there are situations in everyday life that activities you're doing you make them feel pretty good about that you don't really understand. I remember hearing going to a talk once by a Buddhist teacher, and at the end of the talk there was questions and answers, and one of the women in the group said, well, I was raised as a Christian, and doing charitable work has always been part of my my life, you know, from when I was a child, and I don't hear that in Buddhism. And the teacher said to her, do you care about these people that you're helping? And she was taken aback because she'd never thought about that. And in a little voice she said, no. This is more a habit that she formed. And he said, well, when you care, then you'll know what to do. I mean, it's so simple. And in Buddhism, there's also this notion of idiot compassion. In other words, if someone wants something from you, but you think it will not serve them to have it, then giving that to them would be idiot compassion. You know, the person says, you know, I'm out of whiskey and he's really drunk, and can you give me some more whiskey? I really want it. Well, it would be idiot compassion to say, well, of course you want more, here it is. Right? Because his attachment to the whiskey is what's causing his trouble. So you have to raise it to another level. See, what does he really need? How could you really help this person without contributing to his misery? And that's a challenge. Right? And that's what the great teachers of the world have found a way to do, to not deal with the system at the lowest level, but raise it a level or two till it becomes a caring, really compassionate thing to do.
So, I know you've told me this before about the Buddha being a tremendous debater before enlightenment.
Oh yeah, that's in this book, Houston Smith's book. That was one of the things that really, he said, to be confused or embarrassed, I think, in disputation, that I cannot imagine. In other words, that sounds very arrogant, okay? But it's not arrogant if it's true. So, in other words, if you knew you could, solve any math problem, you really could, and you've never, well, then if you could tell people, false humility, say, well, maybe I can do it, I'm very sure I can do it. Well, that was his attitude. In matters of debate, he was very sure and very capable. So there was no notion that his compassion made him kind of wishy-washy in his thinking. So the way I like to think of him is one of the most cool-headed and warm-hearted people that I've ever heard of. And sometimes we think if you're going to have a warm heart, you have to be kind of mushy in your thinking. Or if you're crisp, I'll come back to that word in a minute. If you're very clear in your thinking, then you can't be warm-hearted. No, see, the Buddhists, as I understand, also think that emotions are other thoughts. We mentioned that with angry and so forth. So we control our thoughts. And so when it comes to these kinds of conversations that you have with people, it's important to get to what is the fundamental belief that you're having about them in order to know how to deal with them. Yeah. Yeah. So in my own life. I remember this one thing I wanted to mention there, that the same Buddhist teacher dealt with the woman when he was asked a question, when I asked him a question about dealing with a place where you might hurt a person's feelings. Should you be less than completely honest with them? Which I thought I was going to say, and he did. But he put it in a good way. He said, keep it crisp, which to me meant tell what's so. Not with any embellishments on it, and not leaving anything out, but the best representation of what's so that you can. Because then you could never improve on that. It's exactly right. So for example, with the woman was having trouble with her this prerequisite course that she had to take, it would have been wrong for me. Oh, I feel so sorry for you because you have to take this. I'm sure the faculty doesn't realize how much pain is. See, that would have been a very mushy conversation. In fact, there was no good argument for her not taking it. It was essential to what she wanted to do. It was not easy for her, and it might not be easy for other people. But if she wants to get this thing that she's attached to, that's on the path. And that's keeping it crisp. Yeah.
Speaking of keeping it crisp, do
Yes.
you've sometimes said that the Buddha had some views on taxation, and
Well, that goes to the Eightfold Path, which has to do with right understanding, right thought, right words, right speech, and gets down to right action. All of these things being lined up completely. But then part of right action, what kind of employment are you going to take? Right? What's right employment? And so he was asked, what kind of professions might make it easier and harder to become enlightened. And one of them was being a butcher. See, because to be a butcher you have to kill. Now, Buddhas did not come down on whether it was bad to eat meat or something like that, to my understanding. But what he did know was that killing things was not conducive to living a life seeking enlightenment. And so he's not saying a butcher couldn't do that. He's just saying it's kind of an impediment on the path to enlightenment. And another one that he had was tax collector. Because if you think about it, the tax collector cannot be swayed by the poverty or illness or anything like that of the people he's trying to get money from. In a sense, he's just like a thief. The thief doesn't care whether he's taking. Maybe some thieves would not rob people who are sick or something, but the tax collector has agreed to take this money, period. It's not if they can afford it or something. It's you're going to get that money out of them, and if it leaves them in a worse situation, well, that's the rules of the game, and now I'm just going to enforce them. And so that was another profession that he also said wouldn't make enlightenment impossible, but would certainly make it more difficult. And indeed, if you think about it, any kind of coercion is going, where you're forcing other people to do things as opposed to doing it willingly, is going to be an impediment to your becoming enlightened. And probably also to theirs, because of the resentment they will have of what you are doing to them. Notice the difference between that and situations of exchange, where people say when they go to buy bread, they're happy to give the money to the baker for the bread, and the bread is happy to get the money for the bread. The baker's happy to get money for the bread. So they're both smiling. The consumer, because he's got bread, he prefers to the money, and the baker, because he's got money, prefers to the bread, and all goes well. There's nothing about being an honest merchant or consumer that's in any way an impediment to enlightenment. As a matter of fact, you're probably adding to the welfare of everyone by doing both of those things.
So what would you say about the current rhetoric around consumerist culture, a transaction mentality, and people who rain down on non-coercive exchanges as taking us in a wrong direction?
Non-coercive exchange?
As in what they call the market being putting us into a transaction mentality.
The market doesn't put you into any kind of mentality. You put yourself into that mentality. Now, I know in my own life, I want to have as many relationships instead of transactions as possible. In other words, I want to deal with a person, and I would like to continue dealing with that person if I possibly can. Now, sometimes that's, if you go to the supermarket, it's not so easy to form a relationship with the person, but you can. You know, you can usually just exchange a few words with the checkout person that you recognize that they are doing you a service. And if you do that, I know my second wife Joyce, when we went to a place in our camper, there was only one supermarket around, sort of a country store, and although it was like any other supermarket, she knew the stories behind everybody working there. And when we came back many years later, many months later, I should say, she would ask them, now, you know, did so and so go to college, or did they join the army, and so forth. I mean, why not? You don't have to treat the person who's running your goods through the scanner as if they're a machine. So that's an alternative open to all of us. And I know throughout my life, many of the things where I started out to buy a good or a service ended up being people who were great teachers of mine. I mean, I can get into endless detail on that. So you're making a big mistake if you decide that you're going to treat life as a bunch of transactions, even on the internet. Okay? In other words, last Friday, I was on the internet with a person that's designing a desktop computer for me, I mean, putting it together. We had a great conversation. And I know that, his name was William, and I know that if I had a problem, that I could call him and say, William, no, this isn't working the way you said it would. And he wouldn't say, I'm sorry you bought it. Okay? You get that feeling when you deal with people that they want you to be pleased with what you're getting from them. And just as you want to be pleased in knowing that you've got something you like and that people will stand behind. So this is kind of a strange zero-sum game notice of transactions where of purchases where you have to sort of treat it as if everybody out there is a machine. That's up to you. You want to deal with machines. Nothing wrong with machines. I like them, but they're means to an end. People are a lot warmer at the moment than machines.
Now you've also shared with us from time to time stories from the Bible, and in particular the one about Jesus and the adulterer.
Yeah.
And the bet you had.
Oh yeah, this was Jesus and the woman. Yeah. And this was with my mother. Okay. Yes, this is a bet I had with my mother, because the way we were told about this was that this I think she was a prostitute or something. I think that was the way the story went. And anyway, Jesus washed her feet, and out of lovingness toward her. And then the story was that I heard was, go and sin no more. And that's why we learned it from, that's what my mother said it was. And I said, I can't believe that. That's so out of character. It's judgmental, right? Why would Jesus say it? So we bet $10. This is many years ago now. But how are we going to resolve it? Because Jesus isn't around to tell us what he really said. But my aunt was a Jehovah's Witness, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are great believers in getting it accurate a translation of the Bible as they possibly can. So the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible has they have a whole place in Brooklyn, does nothing but make sure it's up to date, going back to the Greek and the Aramaic. So when you read something in that Bible, there's all kinds of footnotes saying this is what it was in Greek, but really the original was Aramaic and this is what it meant. So we agreed that whatever it said would determine whether I was going to win or she would. If he said go and sin no more, then she would win. And if he said something much gentler than that, I would win. And so we looked in the Jehovah's Witness Bible, and there it was. What he said, according to the translation, was, go in peace. So I got my $10. And just think about that. See, I just heard today about a book that I would like to read. It's about someone who's who is not a believer in formal religions. And he's written a book about Jesus Christ. And the two characters are Jesus and Christ, where Jesus is the teacher, the person that you love, and Christ is the one who's sort of being influenced in forming a religion. Now, of course, it's a novel, but from what I heard of it, it's kind of interesting because you can see there's almost two different views of that whole story that's come down to us from reporters, right, over 2,000 years. But, and it was a heresy, as you probably know, actually a heresy at the time of Thomas Bayes, to believe that Christ was only a great teacher. Okay, so this book is a heretical notion for some people if they took it as not a novel but a real thing. But what's wrong with being a great teacher? Yeah.
I'd like to end by asking you to talk about your views on non-dualism or how you understand it.
Well, it's kind of interesting that one of the things that I experienced during my weekend 30-odd years ago.
We should get that in a separate session. Maybe
Yeah,
the next one.
yeah, maybe the next one. Was that, and this just the way it seemed to me that everyone was God, only they didn't know it. And what I realized was, or thought, was suppose you were God. What would life look like? What would your existence look like? Well, you say, I want another universe, boom, there it is. I mean, you can create anything you want. And so, why would you do anything? You can't have a joke, by the way, if you're God, because you know the punchline the same time you know the joke. Right? I mean, and you never do an experiment because you know how it's going to come out. I mean, life is, you got two choices. You either do absolutely nothing, or you play a game. And what game would you play? Well, I think you'd play the best game there is. And that would be teaching and learning, in my view, as we said before. But how can you learn when you're God? I mean, you know it all. So what you'd have to do would be to say, okay, I'm going to give up some of my powers of creating and knowing what's going to happen and so forth in order to have the joy of teaching and learning. And if you think about it, in other words, he's going to play a game. And the essence of any game is that it has to have rules. And, if you teach someone checkers or chess, and checkers, you say, well, you can only move on the black square. So, and person, well, I could move off. I could move all over the table. No. That's not the rules of the game. You actually could do that, but that wouldn't be a good game. The good game comes with constraints. You get 3 strikes in baseball. Every game you ever thought of would become nothing if you eliminated the constraints. So if you want to play a game, you got to have constraints. So God said, okay, well, or the supreme being, or you figure out your own name for it. the infinity sign. God said, okay, well, to play this game, I have to impose constraints on myself. So I'm going to have a life that has a finite duration. That's what it will seem like. Of course, it's all a joke because that's all part of me anyway. But it will seem to the people there that they have only this life to live and this kind of thing. Okay, now the trick is, if they knew that this was only a game, then they wouldn't learn to teach anything because they know they're going to be God. So think about it like people watching a movie in a movie theater, right? They're watching this movie, and all of a sudden the screen goes dark, and the manager comes out and says, "I want you to know what you're seeing is not really happening. This is just light projected through a film, and these people are not really, they're not alive. As they're depicted here, in fact, they're appearing in other movies right now. So this is a complete illusion that you have." Would people say, "Oh, thank you for telling us"? Or would you say, you're ruining the enjoyment of the film? So, you see, you will enjoy life more if you don't know your God. Okay? And sometimes there are little breakthroughs. One of the things the Buddha said, which I thought was amazing, when he was dealing with his disciples, he forbade them to perform miracles before the multitude, before lay people. Now notice that. He didn't say, "I know you can't." He said, "I forbid you to." Okay? So to me, we're all God and we don't know. And you talk about world peace or something. Right now, it seems like a really dumb idea to cut your arm off because it's part of you. Well, when people have this realization that they're all God, then killing someone would be like cutting your arm off. It wouldn't be sinful. It'd be dumb. Be a useless thing to do. But right now it's easy to have the thoughts of rage, anger, revenge, and all this permit us to do it. So that's my view of life. I'm God, so are you, so is everybody else, and they don't know it, and that's okay.
That note, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.